Now, in all the demos that we've done so far, they've all been single view applications. And in fact, when you start an XCode project, it just gives you one default view. We're going to take a look at how we can add a second view so that you can navigate between the two. iPhone applications, you usually have more than one view. And we're going to take a look at what code you need to write in order to navigate between the two views. Okay, let's do it.
You notice that we're using Xcode 5 in this demo, and if you're still using Xcode 4, don't worry, you'll still be able to follow along, and I'll point out along the way what the differences are for Xcode 4 if there are any, and I'll show you what to do. So don't worry, if you're using Xcode 4, you'll still be able to follow this tutorial 100%. Okay, so we'll start off by creating a new project. And let's create a single view application, and we'll add a second view to that. If you're using Xcode 4, you'll want to make sure that use storyboards is checked because we want to use them in this demo, and use automatic reference counting should also be checked, and include unit tests. You can leave them as default, and devices we want to build for iPhone right now, so make sure it's set to iPhone. Now give your project a name and then choose a place to save it. Alright, now the first thing I want you to go to is your storyboard file. Click this, and then go up to Editor, and then go Embed In, and hit Navigation Controller, select that. Now with storyboards, you can actually double click here on an empty area on the storyboard to zoom out. But keep in mind that in zoomed out view, you can't drag UI elements onto the views, so you can double click again to go into zoomed in view to add UI elements. But zoomed out view is good because it allows you to get an overall view of your project in your app flow and reposition the views. And if I haven't explained what a storyboard is already, it's essentially like in Xcode 4 when you were working with zip files, views for your view controllers, except that in a storyboard you're able to see the app flow and you're able to make connections between the view controllers so that you can navigate between views. So it's essentially you're still using Interface Builder to put UI elements onto the views, but it's more of a bigger picture view of the app flow, if you will. Now the next thing we'll want to do is add a second view controller as our second view. So in this demo, the first view is going to display the address and an image of a physical location, and the second view is going to be a map about that area. If your library pane is not looking at the Objects tab, switch to that. See, there are a couple of tabs here. So make sure you're in the Objects tab, and if you don't see View Controller, you can just type it in here, and then it'll filter it in. It'll filter it out. It doesn't look like it, but it filtered out the rest of the stuff. Drag a basic View Controller here. So see, it's a little messy again, so I'm just going to... Now, the thing I want to show you here is that, remember with our view controllers in the past, when you click Assistant Editor, it would show up the corresponding view controller code file. Whether it was the .m or the .h, and then we create outlets or actions into these files. But with the new view controller that we just created, it auto-generated a view controller file for us. So instead, we want to create our own view controller class and attach it to this view. So right now, the initial view controller that was created with our project right here, that manages this first view right here. The fact that we dragged a second view controller, essentially it's just a view onto the storyboard, it auto-generated a view controller class to manage that view for us. So right now we're going to go to this folder here, create a new file, new Objective-C class, and we're going to type in map view controller. And for subclass, we're going to make sure that says UI view controller, and you can leave these two options unchecked, and that's the same for Xcode 4. Just going to save it. So I want this map view controller class to be the class that manages this view. So what you can do actually here is in your storyboard, click the second view controller that we added, and then up here in the inspector view, in this tab, there are a couple of tabs. Switch the tab where you see custom class, and then in the class right here, you can actually type in map view controller. And just by doing that, you can see that when you click this view now, on the assistant editor view, it shows you the map view controller. That's specifying that this map view controller manages this view. Now let's add a button on the first view to travel to the second view. Alright, so get into zoomed in view so we can add UI elements. these buttons here, you can shift your view so that you get more space if you need it. I need the object library. Okay. Search for UI button. And this stuff that you guys did before, so it shouldn't come as anything new. I'm going to go into the properties inspector and change this button text to map. Okay. Now all you have to do is hold down Control and click your new button and then drag a blue line into your second view controller. And then a little modal will pop out asking what type of segue do you want. Choose push. And in the recap video, we'll go more in depth into what a navigation controller is and what actually is happening behind the scenes. And don't worry too much about that. For now, I just want you guys to follow along and practice these actions. Okay, so in the last video, we introduced the model view controller pattern. And in the past, in our previous two practices, we didn't have a model class to represent the model in the MVC pattern. So in this one, we're actually going to create a class to represent our model. And that model is going to basically feed the location that we're going to display. Now, before we even create the model, we need to create a class that represents the location so that the model has, an object to pass to the view controller. So we're going to create a new class called location, a new Objective-C class called location, and it's a subclass of NSObject. And our model is going to pass back an instance of location to the view controller, and the view controller is going to take those properties of our location object and it's going to feed it to the view so the view can display that information. So let's create our model class. So it's going to be another Objective-C class. We're going to call this location data controller. And it's also a subclass of NSObject, just in case you guys missed that. Okay, so let's work on our location class first. We're going to want to have a couple of properties on our location. For instance, we're going to want an address, which will be of type NSString. An NSString is considered an object, so it's going to need a star to denote that this is a pointer. I'll show you in a second when you don't need it. We're going to want the file name of the photo that we're going to display. So I'm just going to make it a string as well. And then we're going to also want to store the latitude and longitude. Oops. Now this doesn't need a star because it's not a pointer to an object. Float is a numerical value. It's essentially a floating point decimal. Okay, so our location class is going to represent a physical location with these properties. Now our model, or our location data controller, will need a method that the view controller can call to retrieve an instance of location. So we're going to create a method that will return a location object. We need the star because essentially it's a pointer to where the object is. And if it's confusing right now, you're going to get the hang of when you need to put that star and when you don't need to. Essentially, you'll get used to it when we work with objects and we're passing variables that reference objects. We're going to need the star to denote that that variable is a pointer. Don't worry if you get confused now. The more you do it, the more you'll understand. So XCode is complaining right now that in location data controller, it doesn't know what location is. It doesn't know what about this class. So we got to import that class, the header file specifically, so that it will know about it. Okay, so we've done two things right now that we talked about in the last recap. We've manually declared properties, and we've also manually typed out a method signature in the header file. So you'll know that this method is a public method that other classes will be able to see. So let's implement this method now in the implementation file of the location data controller. So I'm going to copy the method signature and add the curly braces. And normally in a model, you will probably get your data from an external source, either from like a feed, an RSS feed, a JSON feed, or a database in a remote server somewhere. It connect through an API and grab that data. But for this demo, we're just going to manually create a location object and hard code some values and return that. So our model is always going to return the same location over and over again. So once again, I'm going to declare a variable to hold our location object, which means that we're going to need a start is equal to, and I'm going to allocate a new instance of the location class and call a init on that object to initialize it. So now I've got a new instance of location, and I'm going to start setting its properties. A place that I really liked in San Francisco is called Phil's Coffee, and it's a really cool coffee place with lots of different types of coffee. I like this so much, in fact, I bought a couple of bags home. Okay, so the photo name is going to be coffee beans, although we haven't added that image to the project yet, but we will just after this. And the next thing I want to do is add the latitude and longitude. Now the next thing I want to do is input the latitude and longitude for the location. And there's a ton of websites out there. If you just Google convert address to lat long, there are websites where you can just punch in the address and it'll spit out the latitude and longitude for you. 37.781453, and the longitude is minus 122.417158, and then I'm going to return this object. Remember, that means that because we specified the return type as a location object, I'm going to have to actually return something. And so in this method, what happens is it creates a new instance of the location class, sets all these properties, and then returns it to whoever is calling it. So now let's add the coffee beans image. So you can click the link on the screen or in the description below to go to a page where you can download the source code for this project as well as the coffee beans image. And you're going to have to sign up for a free CodeWithChris account, and then after that you'll be able to download it. So I'm going to give you a minute to download that. Okay, so now that you've got the coffee beans image, we have to add it to the project. It's going to differ a little bit between Xcode 4 and 5. In Xcode 4, you can just drag it into your project like this, and then you can have this checked off if it's not in your project folder, and I'll copy it there, and then click finish and you've added it. In Xcode 5, we can use our asset catalog, and so choose the asset catalog from the project navigator, and then you can right click here, go import, and then you can choose your coffee beans image. And the asset catalog just allows you to manage different versions of your assets easily. So for example, if you choose which devices this is going to work for, like iPad, then it'll tell you that you're going to need a Retina one and a non-Retina one, and it'll just help you manage that. And I just realized that our image is a PNG, so we need to go back to our model and change that file extension, that file name, to .png. Alright, now let's add some UI elements to our first view in order to show that data. So I'm going to start by searching for UI image view in the lower right. I'm going to drag this guy here. Okay, remember you can't add elements in zoomed out view, so make sure you're in the zoomed in view. Next, I'm going to add a UI label. Okay, I'm just going to stretch it out. And you can make sure that in the properties inspector, set lines to 0 to ensure that it will wrap. It will be multi-line. Okay, so that's sufficient for now. So remember that the view controller is going to get the location object from our model, which is the location data controller, and then it's going to take that location object and update these UI elements with the location properties. So in order to do that, the view controller needs a reference to these two elements. So now let's do that. Let's go to the header file and do what you've done before in previous practices by holding the control and clicking and dragging here and creating a property to expose these UI elements to the view controller. I'm going to call this one photo image view, and for the label I'm going to call that address label. Okay, now go to the implementation file of the view controller, and then underneath view did load, underneath that method, I want you to add a new method called viewDidAppear. And you'll notice that as soon as you start typing it, Xcode will detect that that's the method you want. And this is because you're actually overriding the viewDidAppear method of the UIViewController class. And in the recap, we'll go into what subclassing is. So for now, press enter and you can add that method. And then in this method, essentially it gets triggered right after the view has appeared to the user. And we can, we need to import the header file for the location data controller, and as well as the location, or else ViewController doesn't know about them. So I'm just going to create a variable called model to hold our instance of the location data controller, and then I'm going to allocate it, initialize it, and then I'm also going to create a variable to hold our location. And this variable is going to hold the location that the model passes back. So I'm going to call that method that we created in our model called getPointOfInterest. And it's going to return that location and assign it to this POI variable. Now I can access the properties that we just created on our view in our storyboard and go self.addressLabel.text equals POI.address. And furthermore, I can say self.photoImageView. There's a method called setImage of the UI image view, which will take in a UI image. So I need to somehow convert that file that we added, the coffeebeans.png, to a UI image class. Well, the UI image class actually has a class method, and we'll get into that in the future, called ImageNamed. So where you can pass in a string for the file name as long as it's in your project, and it'll convert it into, it'll create a UI image pointing to that file. So actually we can set it to the property of our location, photo file name, and that's why we created that property. Okay, so now you can run your application and see what happens. But essentially in this method, it's getting the location from the model, and then it's updating the address and the UI image view with the properties. Okay, so this is great because we see our properties showing up, and if you click the map button, you actually get to navigate to the other view. Press back to get back. Now let's add a map to the second view. So go back to the storyboard and go to the second view, and then search for map view. You can drag it, plop it on there. Now in Assistant Editor, you want to go to the header file. We want to expose this map as a property to the map view controller. So hold down Control, drag it over, let go. I'm going to call this map view. And right now our project doesn't know what this class is, MKMapView. So it actually exists in another framework which we have to add. By default, Xcode doesn't include all the frameworks for all the functionality, because then your app would be incredibly bloated and you'd have all this code and all these frameworks for stuff you don't need. So you just add what you need a la carte style. So go here and click this root node in your project navigator. And actually you could do it right here in Xcode 5. You can just click plus, and then you search for a MapKit, and then just double click that to add it. And so now you've added MapKit framework, and that will give you the functionality for maps. In Xcode 4, however, you go to build phases, and then you click this tab, link library with libraries, and then you'll find that section here where you can add it. Okay, now if you run it, so now let's go back to the MapViewController.h, and we need to import that framework. So now MapViewController will know about that, and it'll know about what MKMapView is. So now you can run it, and when you click map, you will actually see, you'll get a map. So we'll want to switch the region of the map to our coffee shop location. So stop the project and then go to the implementation file. I'm going to go to the single view now. Go to the implementation file of the map view controller, and we're also going to use the viewDidAppear method again. So override that, essentially what we're going to do in this method is ask our model for the location, and then we're going to grab the latitude and longitude of that location, and we're going to make the map view go to that region. So we have to import the location data controller header file as well as the location header file so that this class knows about it. Just like last time, I'm going to create a new instance of that. Create a variable to hold the location, calling the get point of interest method again. And then in order to set the map to a specific region, you use a method of the map view called setRegion. However, setRegion takes a, as you can see from here, an MK coordinate region. And then for animated, you can specify yes or no. Boolean is a yes or no variable. So in order to use this method, we're going to have to create a coordinate region. So let me set that to yes first, and then up here, we'll create our coordinate region. We'll call that view region. And there's a convenience method called MK coordinate region make with distance. So you can see from this documentation that it needs a center coordinate to center the region around, and then you need to specify meters, but basically how large that area, that region you want it to be. So before we can even use this method, we need to create a coordinate. So I'm going to create a coordinate with the coordinates of our location, our point of interest. And then I'm going to go back to this method, and I'm going to I'm going to pass in the coordinates of our location. We'll just say 750 and 750. And now that we have this region, we can finally use the setRegion method. So I'm going to pass it into there. So essentially what's happening is that creating a coordinate with the same latitude and longitude as our coffee shop, and then we're creating a region around that point spanning 750 meters by 750 meters, with the center being our coffee shop. And then we're setting the region of our map to that region. So now let's run it and see what happens. So when you click map, it should zoom in, and yeah, it shows that region where the coffee shop is. So that's kind of cool, and you can press back and navigate back and forth. And it does it again because every time the view appears, this method gets called and triggered. Okay, so that's where we're going to end off in this demo. In the next video, we're going to do a recap, and we're going to look at what we've done in this video as well as introduce some new concepts like subclassing. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. As always, the notes are in the description below. There's a link to it to go to my site. And if you have any questions, you can ask here or ask on that article. And don't forget, if you found this lesson helpful and you know anybody, friends or colleagues or family who want to learn about iOS programming, please share this video with them. I'd really appreciate it. There's a share button below the video, which you can use to share it on Facebook or Twitter. Alright, until next time, see you guys later. Bye.